Hello everyone, my name is Ronald and I am a MA student in the Digital Technologies for Language Teaching program. I'd like to thank everyone for allowing me to participate today. I'm very excited to be a part of this seminar. It's one of my first, so I hope that you will enjoy the presentation and the following discussion.
Okay, so the goal of my intervention and essay was to inform language teachers of the various types of corrective feedback that could be used with learners throughout language teaching and activities occurring within the classroom. And to accomplish this, I adopted Van Leer's expanded model of the ZPD, Zone of Proximal Development, and modified it as a corrective feedback template that pairs the most effective types of explicit and implicit corrective feedback with the language form being practiced in the classroom. And these diagrams and the suggested feedback type are differentiated for higher and lower ability language learners, and both are designed for use in collaborative learning environments where students are working on various tasks collaboratively. And we'll have a look at these diagrams a little bit later in the presentation. So initially, what prompted this inquiry, other than the requirement that I develop an igniting question and an intervention for my SLA module, if I wanted to get a passing mark, was what was happening in my classroom. Some of the experiences and struggles that I was having with delivering effective corrective feedback to my students. And secondly, there was an interesting little fact I came across while researching that said something to the extent of 70% of all instructor-provided corrective feedback is almost ineffective. So before delving any deeper, it might be helpful if we quickly review some of the terminology associated with corrective feedback.
Explicit negative feedback means that the student has done something wrong. The learner has made a mistake, obviously, and this form of feedback clearly states that there is something wrong with that, with their output. So things like direct corrections, metalinguistic or negotiated feedbacks, prompts, these are methods of providing explicit feedback, and ultimately the job of explicit CF is to get the student to draw out or develop a more accurate construction. All right? Whereas implicit negative CF is issued in the form of a marked or an unmarked recast or a repetition or a clarification request or even elicitation. It doesn't necessarily signal to the student exactly what they've done wrong. It kind of just skirts around it, and you know that you've made a mistake, but you've got to use your implicit knowledge or experience to conclude where that mistake is and fill in the gap or make it correct. So yeah, let's.
And to add to this, the lack of diversity in the selection of corrective feedback type for second language learners and students who lack the ability to provide beneficial feedback in peer activities makes it difficult for students to reap the benefits of learning in collaborative environments, as they are unable to fully acquire and refine key 21st century skills such as communication, problem solving, and critical thinking. So now let's get personal. In large communicative language classes such as my own, where I have 28 to 32 students, it is difficult to consistently provide quality verbal corrective feedback for each student, and monitoring their utterances for repair can be even more difficult. So most times, as a way of managing time and completing the lesson objectives, I have sometimes resorted to unmarked recast, which we now all know rank as the most ineffective amongst lower ability language learners. And during collaborative activities involving communicative language tasks, it is also difficult for students to provide peer feedback of any form, and oftentimes, because I'm unable to observe each group, students finish the lesson without having embedded the skills practiced during the lesson. And this leads to frequent revision sessions in the next lesson. And sadly, in my classroom, this occurrence had turned into something of a vicious cycle where different phonological, grammatical, and lexical language targets were not mastered. And this meant that growth for my students was limited for the lower level kids. And in some cases, for my higher ability students, I noticed that they were regressing or even stagnating.
So, in my intervention, I am suggesting, based on this quote here that says that learners actually use CF more when working in groups of learner to learner as opposed to learner to speaker or native speaker. And they also have a higher tendency to self-correct when interacting with other learners, in contrast to native speakers. So I suggest that as teachers, we capitalize on this occurrence or tendency and give students some training on how to interact and give useful corrective feedback when working on collaborative activities or having, a conversation. So the CF to be taught will be aligned with the task or form focus, and we will look at, based on previous studies, what are the most appropriate and effective ways of giving negative CF for each language focus.
Okay, so now we have arrived at the intervention tool that I slightly modified as a resource to be used by language teachers and learners. And if we have a look at Van Leer's expanded model of the ZPD, we can view what might be described as the internal processes taking place in the ZPD of your basic, intermediate, and higher ability language learner in a meaning-focused social learning environment. And beginning in the lower right-hand corner, our learner, when interacting with lower ability peers, may practice and solidify his or her knowledge of a particular exercise by teaching, reviewing, discussing, and correcting the verbal or written production of a peer. And this same student, when interacting with equal ability peers, may actually increase their level of experimentation using different language structures or the form being targeted in class. And also, this same student may increase the rate of issuing corrective feedback and experimenting with it. And research suggests that this increase in corrective feedback delivery and the following experimentation occurs at a higher rate between 2 or more non-native speakers, as opposed to native speaker and non-native learner, or instructor and non-native learner. So it is good to pair students together, and perhaps it would be beneficial to give them some training and how to deliver useful corrective feedback, because they already feel a little bit more comfortable interacting with each other as non-natives to the language, as opposed to, you having interaction or them having interaction with the teacher or someone who's a native speaker. In other instances, students can seek assistance from higher level peers and the instructor through modeling and scaffolds. And it should be noted here that this tends to be the instance where marked recast, repetition, and explicit correction are most useful. Lastly, in the area of inner resources, knowledge, experience, and memory, when working independently or in groups, the learner resorts to their internalized experiences and skills solidified from learned strategies, practice, and teacher modeling. So ultimately, Van Leer's expanded model of ZPD highlights the negotiation processes occurring when language learners are exposed to the emotional, social, and cognitive interchanges that occur when engaging in conversation, and language tasks similar to those listed in the model. Alright, so these are the actual scaffolds, and this one is for your lower ability language learners, and this model extends on Van Leer's expanded model of the ZPD by placing different language forms and task types into each sector, then providing selections of corrective feedback that might be most effective for lower ability learners. So within each section you can find a description of phonological, lexical, and grammatical types, language types that you might be focusing on. For example, in the sector of interaction with equal peers, students might be working on a lexical task such as synonyms or suffixes using jargon or idiomatic expressions, or they might be working on pronunciation fluency, articulating their thoughts and ideas, or even rephrasings. And when students are working with equal peers, the most appropriate feedback type to use would be a clarification request or a repetition. Whereas if you were focusing on verb tense, subject-verb agreement, pronouns, again, fluency, articulation, or rephrasing, and this is interaction where a student is receiving assistance from higher level peers or the instructor, then explicit correction, marked recast, repetitions are best used to correct form, whereas negotiations encourage students to clarify their meaning or rephrase what it is that they were trying to say. When we look in the bottom left-hand corner, inner resources, knowledge, experience, and memory, in these instances, I think the tasks are going to be possibly speaking and listening, comprehension task, or an error detection activity. And this is where a student would rely on their internal skills, experiences, strategies that they've learned, or modeling from the teacher. And in this instance, repetition, a marked recast, or a simple clarification request could be the best form of feedback to use. And lastly, in the lower right-hand corner, interaction with lower ability peers, the form focus type might be making inquiries, listening for comprehension within dialogues, role plays, again, error detection task, working on pronouns or verb tense. And in this area, repetition, marked recast, and metalinguistic feedback are the best corrective feedback forms to use with our lower ability language learners.